The ballroom of the Grand Monarch Hotel glittered under 1,000 chandeliers, the kind of place where fortunes were flaunted and reputations were cemented. Tonight, every elite figure in the city gathered for one purpose: to celebrate Ryan Mitchell's wedding. Ryan stood tall in a custom tuxedo, champagne glass in hand, wearing the smug grin of a man who thought he had conquered life itself. But his toast was not about love, it was about cruelty. With his new bride Vanessa clinging to his arm, Ryan raised his voice so the entire hall could hear. "A year ago, I was shackled to failure, a wife who couldn't even give me a child, a life that dragged me down, but I cut that chain loose, and tonight, I rise with a woman worthy of my future." Gasps rippled through the room. The insult was sharp, deliberate, and everyone knew who it was aimed at: Emily Carter, his ex-wife. The same woman he had discarded when she fell ill, when whispers spread that she might be infertile. He had abandoned her without remorse, and now he dared to call her barren before the most powerful names in the city. Laughter followed his words, cruel and careless. Vanessa leaned in with a smirk, whispering loud enough for nearby guests to catch. "Poor thing. I wonder if she'll even dare to show her face tonight." The crowd murmured, hungry for scandal. They had heard the rumors: Emily living in poverty, working menial jobs, fading into obscurity. To them, Ryan's story sounded believable, and in that belief their cruelty bloomed. "What a shame," one woman sighed, though her lips curved into a satisfied smile. He truly traded up. Ryan basked in their approval, drinking in the humiliation he thought Emily would soon suffer. He had even sent her an invitation, gilded and mocking, daring her to attend this circus. In his mind, she would appear weak, defeated, dressed in something borrowed and pitiful. He had no idea. Emily Carter was not the broken woman he imagined. She was carrying a secret, one that would shake the ground beneath his perfect wedding. And as the golden doors of the ballroom waited to open, the storm was already on its way. Far away from the glittering chandeliers of the Grand Monarch Hotel, Emily Carter's life unfolded in silence and shadows. She lived in a small, dimly lit apartment on the city's edge, a world away from the marble halls where Ryan flaunted his wealth. Her days began before dawn and ended long after midnight, her body aching from endless work. Yet no matter how hard she tried, life never seemed to give her a reprieve. Emily had once been a gentle soul, full of dreams about a happy marriage and a family of her own. When she married Ryan, she thought she had finally found stability. But those dreams collapsed piece by piece until nothing remained but loneliness. After the divorce, whispers spread quickly. Neighbors whispered when she passed by. Old friends turned cold. Even the grocer looked at her with pity as she paid with crumpled bills. The label Ryan had stamped on her, barren, stuck like a cruel brand. It didn't matter that Emily had never given up hope of becoming a mother. It didn't matter that her body still carried life within it, unknown even to her in those early months. What mattered to the world was Ryan's story, and Ryan's story painted her as a failure. At work, she cleaned offices late at night, scrubbing floors until her hands cracked and bled. During the day, she folded laundry at a local laundromat, the smell of detergent soaking into her clothes. Her meals were small, sometimes just bread and water, because every penny had to be stretched. When exhaustion consumed her, she reminded herself to keep breathing, to keep moving. There was no one else to depend on, no one else to help. The cruelest part was how quickly she had been forgotten. Just a year ago, she had been Ryan's wife, the woman who smiled at business dinners, who tried her best to fit into the world he craved. Now she was invisible. People avoided her eyes, afraid her misfortune might cling to them like a curse. Even her own family had begun to keep their distance, ashamed of the gossip. But Emily did not lash out. She carried her pain in silence, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered. At night, she sat by the window of her apartment, listening to the muffled laughter from the streets below, and wondered if happiness would ever return to her. Sometimes she prayed, sometimes she cried, but most of the time, she simply endured. The golden invitation to Ryan's wedding sat on her kitchen table, a cruel reminder of her fall. She had almost thrown it away. She had almost ripped it into shreds, burned it, destroyed it. Yet it remained, shining mockingly under the dim light. Ryan wanted her to come. He wanted her to stand in the shadows of his triumph, broken and humiliated. She told herself she wouldn't go. She told herself she would never give him that satisfaction. But a voice deep inside whispered that she couldn't run forever. That maybe, just maybe, it was time to face him one last time. Her heart pounded as she looked at the invitation again, her hands trembling. Fear pressed down on her chest like a stone. But beneath that fear, another feeling stirred, a faint ember of defiance she didn't yet recognize. And though Emily couldn't see it yet, the woman Ryan thought was powerless was about to rise from the ashes. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and despair. Emily lay on the narrow bed, her skin pale, her body trembling with fatigue. She had fainted earlier at work, exhaustion and malnutrition finally catching up to her. When the paramedics brought her in, she clung to the hope that Ryan would come rushing through the doors, worried and protective, like the husband she once believed he could be. But the man who entered was not that husband. Ryan strolled into the room hours later, dressed in a crisp suit, his phone in hand. He didn't even glance at Emily before muttering, "Do you know how embarrassing it is to get a call from the hospital while I'm at a client dinner?" Emily tried to sit up, tears brimming in her tired eyes. "Ryan, I collapsed. The doctor says I need rest, maybe some tests. Please just stay with me tonight. I'm scared." Ryan's jaw tightened, his eyes cold. "Tests for what? More proof that you're broken? Emily, I can't keep doing this. You're dragging me down." The words pierced her like knives. She reached for his hand, desperate. "I just need you. I can't do this alone." But Ryan pulled away, his gaze already drifting toward the door. "I don't have time for this. Vanessa's waiting for me downstairs." The name struck Emily like a slap. She had heard it whispered before, the name of his young assistant, the one with the perfect smile, the one always by his side at late-night meetings. Emily had told herself it was innocent, that Ryan would never betray her. But now, hearing him speak it so casually, she felt her chest cave in. "You're leaving me? For her?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Ryan sighed as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience. "Vanessa makes me feel alive. She isn't a burden. She isn't sick. She isn't barren." That word again. Barren. It echoed in her skull like thunder, erasing every ounce of hope she had clung to. Emily's tears streamed freely now, her voice trembling. "But we're married. We vowed." "Vows don't mean anything when the person you married isn't who you need anymore." Ryan's voice was final, his tone sharp. He turned and walked toward the door, pulling his phone out again. Emily reached out weakly, her hand shaking in the air. "Ryan, please." But the door slammed shut behind him. The silence that followed was worse than the rejection. It was a silence that told her she was truly, utterly alone. She curled on the hospital bed, her sobs muffled into the thin blanket. Her heart shattered piece by piece, but even in the depths of her despair, a flicker of defiance stirred. Because as much as Ryan tried to convince her she was nothing without him, Emily knew she still had something he could never take away, the capacity to endure. And within her, though she didn't yet realize it, life was already taking root. Life that would one day expose Ryan's cruelty for all the world to see. The night Ryan walked out of that hospital room was the night Emily's heart broke. Yet it was also the night her greatest secret began to grow. The hospital's fluorescent lights flickered above Emily as she sat alone in the examination room, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Her eyes were still red and swollen from the night Ryan had walked out, leaving her broken on that cold bed. She had begged him to stay, begged him to remember the vows they once shared, but he had chosen Vanessa instead. The nurse entered with a clipboard, offering a kind but professional smile. "Emily, the doctor will see you now." Emily nodded, her stomach tight with dread. She expected bad news, another cruel reminder that Ryan was right, that she was nothing but a failure. But as the doctor sat across from her, the expression on his face was gentle, even warm. "Emily," he began softly, "your blood test came back. You're not sick, in fact. You're pregnant." The word hung in the air like a fragile miracle. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Pregnant?" For a moment, she thought she had misheard. The doctor's smile widened slightly. "Congratulations. You're going to be a mother." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't just from pain. They were from something deeper. Relief, shock, and a glimmer of joy. Her trembling hands pressed against her flat stomach as if she could already feel the tiny heartbeat inside. But the joy was complicated, tangled with fear. Ryan had just called her barren. He had left her, dismissed her, abandoned her for another woman. And now, only hours later, she learned she was carrying his child. Her tears spilled over, running down her cheeks in silent streams. She laughed through the sobs, a sound raw and bittersweet. "Pregnant," she whispered to herself. "After everything, I'm pregnant." The doctor spoke gently about vitamins, checkups, and support groups, but Emily barely heard him. Her mind spun with the weight of the revelation. How would she survive alone? How would she provide for a child, let alone carry the burden of Ryan's rejection? And yet, as she left the hospital that day, clutching the ultrasound pamphlets, something inside her shifted. She was terrified, yes, but she was also alive in a way she hadn't been in months. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the tiny life inside her. That night, she sat by her window in the dim apartment, whispering into the silence. Her hands rested protectively over her stomach. "I don't know how I'll do this," she confessed through quiet sobs, "but I promise you, I'll never leave you. You won't grow up unwanted. You won't grow up unloved." The room was still, but in her heart she felt a spark, a quiet strength rising where despair had lived. For the first time since Ryan abandoned her, she had a reason to hold on, a reason to push forward through the nights of hunger and exhaustion. Her world had crumbled, but from its ruins, a new purpose had emerged. And though Emily could not yet imagine it, the child she carried would one day become the very weapon that shattered Ryan's empire of lies. The days after Emily's revelation passed in a blur of exhaustion and quiet determination. She woke every morning to the sound of her alarm, her body already heavy with fatigue. Her pregnancy was still in its early stages, but the nausea, the dizziness, and the bone-deep weariness were relentless. Still, she pushed herself out of bed, dressed in plain clothes, and walked into the world as if nothing had changed. No one could know. She kept her secret close, hidden beneath loose sweaters and silence. The neighbors already whispered about her, calling her the poor, abandoned wife. If they learned she was carrying Ryan's child, the gossip would spread like wildfire. They would say she was desperate, clinging to a man who had moved on without her. She couldn't bear that shame. Not yet. Instead, she worked. At night, she scrubbed offices until her knees ached and her hands stung with chemicals. She emptied trash bins, polished glass windows, and vacuumed endless carpets, her belly cramping as she pushed through the pain. During the day, she folded laundry in the laundromat, the heat from the machines pressing against her already tired body. Her paycheck was meager, but every dollar mattered. Diapers, formula, medical bills, she calculated the costs in her head until the numbers blurred into nightmares. Sometimes she skipped meals so she could save money. Other times, she ate stale bread or instant noodles, whispering to her unborn child, "This is temporary, I promise you'll have better." At night after work, she would sit by the window with one hand pressed to her stomach. She whispered lullabies she remembered from childhood, soft songs her mother once sang. Her voice trembled with emotion, but the words steadied her heart. "You are wanted," she murmured. "You are loved. I don't care what he said. You are my miracle." The loneliness was crushing. Friends had drifted away after the divorce, uncomfortable with her pain. Her family, ashamed of the gossip, kept their distance. Even at the grocery store, strangers looked at her with pity, or worse, disdain. Emily learned to keep her eyes low, her smile small, her words few. But every kick inside her reminded her she wasn't truly alone. With every flutter, she felt a surge of determination. She was not just Emily, the discarded wife anymore. She was Emily the mother, carrying life within her, stronger than Ryan could ever imagine. Still, the fear never left her. She feared the day she would run out of money, the day her body could no longer keep up with the long hours, the day she would have to face Ryan again. Sometimes she woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, haunted by his cruel words, "Barren, broken, nothing without me." She clutched her stomach in the darkness, whispering fiercely, "We will prove him wrong." And though her nights were filled with hunger and her days with labor, a fire was growing inside her. Because Emily didn't know it yet, but the child she protected in silence would soon become the loudest truth Ryan could never escape. It was a gray afternoon when the news reached her. Emily had just finished folding a pile of laundry at the laundromat, her back aching, when two women walked in, their voices carrying over the hum of the dryers. "Did you hear? Ryan Mitchell's wedding is next month." Emily froze, the shirt in her hands slipping back into the basket. The second woman laughed. "Of course I heard. It's all over the society pages. He's finally marrying that model, Vanessa. Young, gorgeous, and fertile. The perfect upgrade." Fertile. The word cut through Emily's chest like a blade. Her throat tightened as she forced herself to keep folding, but their voices followed her like daggers. "They say his ex-wife couldn't give him children. Poor man. At least he's smart enough to move on before wasting more years." Emily's vision blurred with tears. She could barely breathe. The women didn't know she was standing only a few feet away, her belly already carrying the truth they denied. To them, she was invisible, just another tired laundromat worker, not worth noticing. She left early that day, walking home through the biting wind. Her mind spun with images she didn't want to see. Ryan in a tuxedo, Vanessa in white, their hands entwined as they laughed at her expense. Her chest ached, as if her ribs might shatter under the weight of it. When she reached her apartment, she collapsed into the chair by the window. The golden wedding invitation sat on the table, mocking her. She had ignored it for weeks, but now it burned her eyes like a cruel spotlight. Ryan wasn't just moving on, he was erasing her. He was telling the world she was barren, useless, unworthy of love, and everyone believed him. The gossip spread quickly. Old acquaintances sent her pitying glances. Even at the market, she overheard a man whisper, "That's Ryan's ex-wife, the one who couldn't have kids." His companion sighed. "At least he found someone better." Emily pressed her hands to her belly, where her child shifted softly, as if reminding her of the truth. She wasn't barren. She wasn't broken. Inside her was proof that Ryan was a liar. But no one knew. Not yet. Her tears fell hot and heavy, soaking her palms. "Why does he get to stand in the light?" she whispered, "while I suffer in the dark?" The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as if answering her plea. Emily drew a shaky breath, wiping her face. She had endured hunger, exhaustion, and loneliness. She could endure this too, but something inside her shifted that night, a quiet fury that burned hotter than her grief. She had once thought she could avoid him, stay hidden forever. But Ryan had dragged her name into the open, mocking her in front of the world. He wanted her humiliation. He wanted her silence. And for the first time, Emily wondered if she should give him the opposite. Because if Ryan wanted her to attend that wedding, he was going to get far more than the broken woman he expected. The envelope gleamed gold, embossed with letters so ornate it looked more like a royal decree than an invitation. Emily had tried to ignore it for weeks, letting it sit on her kitchen table like a poisonous thorn. But now, after hearing the gossip and Ryan's cruel boasts, she forced herself to tear it open. Inside lay the card that sealed his mockery. "Ryan Mitchell and Vanessa Ross request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration." Emily's hands shook. Each word carved itself into her like a fresh wound. He hadn't just invited her, he had deliberately summoned her. Ryan wanted her to stand among the crowd, watch him pledge himself to another woman, and confirm to the world that she was the discarded, barren wife he claimed she was. It wasn't kindness, it wasn't courtesy, it was cruelty, sharpened into gold leaf and calligraphy. That night, Ryan sat in his penthouse, sipping aged whiskey as Vanessa twirled in her designer gown. "Do you think she'll come?" she asked, her tone dripping with mockery. "She'll come," Ryan replied, his lips curling into a smug grin. "Emily's pathetic. She's probably desperate just to be seen. The world needs proof of what I've been saying all along, that I traded up. Once they see her standing next to Vanessa, the difference will be undeniable." Vanessa laughed, her jeweled earrings catching the light. "And if she doesn't show?" Ryan leaned back, satisfied. "Then she proves my point even more. Either way, I win." Back in her apartment, Emily sat staring at the invitation, her breath shallow. She imagined the scene, Ryan and Vanessa basking in applause, their smiles wide, the guests whispering cruel comparisons behind their champagne glasses, and her, standing there like a ghost, proving every lie Ryan had told. Her stomach churned. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the faintest movement of the child growing inside her. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't walk into that trap." But the invitation was more than a card. It was a challenge. Ryan wasn't just marrying Vanessa, He was declaring war on Emily's dignity. He wanted her erased, humiliated, broken beyond repair. Her tears dried as anger rose to the surface. She thought of every night she had scrubbed floors until her hands bled, every meal she had skipped to save money, every whispered lullaby to her unborn child in the lonely dark. She thought of Ryan's sneer in the hospital, the way he had chosen Vanessa without hesitation. And then she thought of the lies, the word barren echoing in every corner of society, repeated like a truth. Emily wasn't barren. She wasn't broken. The life inside her was proof. For weeks she had hidden, for months she had endured. But Ryan's cruel scheme lit a fire inside her she could no longer smother. She lifted the invitation one last time, her grip steady now. If Ryan wanted her to attend, then she would. But not as the broken shadow he expected, because Emily Carter was done being his victim, and the stage he had built for her humiliation would soon become the stage for his downfall. The night air was damp with drizzle as Emily walked home from work, clutching her worn-out coat tighter around her. The streets were nearly empty, but the city never truly slept. Neon signs buzzed, casting fractured colors onto the wet pavement. She kept her head low, avoiding stares, her thoughts circling the golden invitation that still lay on her kitchen table. Her stomach tightened with both fear and resolve. She was going to that wedding. But how? In what state? She had no money for gowns or limousines, no power to stand tall in front of Ryan and Vanessa's world. The thought made her chest ache. "Hey, sweetheart." The voice snapped her from her thoughts. Two men leaned against a lamppost ahead, cigarettes glowing in the shadows. Their eyes locked onto her like predators spotting prey. "You walking alone this late?" one of them sneered, stepping forward. Emily's heart raced. She quickened her pace, clutching her bag to her chest. "Don't be rude," the other man laughed, circling closer. "Pretty girl like you shouldn't be out here by herself? Need some company?" Her pulse hammered in her ears. She tried to slip past, but the first man blocked her path, his grin sharp. "Come on, just a smile. We don't bite unless you ask." Emily froze, panic flooding her veins. She wanted to scream, but fear choked her voice. Her hand instinctively pressed against her belly, protecting the child within. Then a new voice cut through the night, calm, deep, and commanding. She said no. The men stiffened. From the shadows stepped a tall figure in a dark, tailored coat, his presence alone enough to shift the air. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on the harassers with quiet authority. "Who the hell are you?" one of them spat. The stranger didn't flinch. "Someone you don't want to test." Something in his voice, steady and cold, made both men falter. They muttered curses but backed away, disappearing into the alley. Emily stood trembling, breath shallow. The stranger turned toward her, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded shakily, though tears threatened to spill. "Yes, thank you. I didn't know what." "You don't need to explain." He offered her a steady hand. "Let me walk you home. It's not safe out here alone." For a moment, Emily hesitated. She had learned not to trust easily, especially after Ryan, but something in the man's eyes, an honesty, a weight of experience, reassured her. Slowly, she nodded. As they walked, silence stretched comfortably between them. Finally, he spoke. "My name is Alexander Blackwell." Emily blinked. The name was familiar, too familiar. Alexander Blackwell was a billionaire, a man whose empire stretched across industries, a name whispered in newspapers and business magazines. She stole a glance at him, unsure if fate was playing a trick. "I know what people say about me," he said, almost amused at her reaction. "But tonight, I'm just someone who didn't want to see harm come to you." Emily swallowed hard, torn between gratitude and disbelief. Why would a man like him notice someone like her? But as his steady gaze lingered on her, she felt something stir inside her. A strange mixture of safety and curiosity. And though Emily couldn't yet imagine it, this chance encounter with Alexander Blackwell would change the course of her life and Ryan's empire forever. The warmth of Alexander's presence lingered in Emily's small apartment long after he had walked her home. She kept replaying the moment he stepped from the shadows, the quiet authority in his voice, the way danger had melted at his command. For the first time in months, she had felt protected. The next evening, a knock echoed on her door. Emily opened it to find Alexander standing there again, dressed not in his immaculate business armor, but in something simple: dark jeans, a wool coat. Still, his aura of power was impossible to miss. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said gently. "I just wanted to check if you were doing all right after last night." Emily flushed, embarrassed by the peeling paint on her door, the threadbare rug at her feet. "I'm fine, thank you again. You didn't have to." "I did," Alexander cut in softly. His eyes held hers with a gravity that made her chest tighten. "No woman should ever feel unsafe. And something tells me you've been carrying more than anyone should." Her throat tightened. He didn't know the half of it. She invited him inside, offering tea in mismatched cups. The billionaire sat at her modest table as though it were a palace banquet, treating her space with a respect Ryan never had. They spoke, hesitantly at first. Emily shared fragments of her story: Ryan's abandonment, the whispers of barrenness, the golden invitation that felt like a dagger. She didn't reveal her pregnancy yet, but even what she confessed left Alexander silent, his jaw tight with restrained anger. When she finished, her hands trembled as they gripped her cup. "I can't go," she whispered. "If I walk into that wedding, I'll be the spectacle he wants. The world will laugh and I'll lose whatever little dignity I have left." Alexander leaned forward, his voice steady but charged. "Or you could turn it around." Emily blinked, stunned. "Turn it around? How?" "By not going alone." His gaze never wavered. "Let me accompany you." The words hit her like thunder. She nearly laughed at the absurdity. "You? At Ryan's wedding?" "Alexander, that's exactly what he wouldn't expect," Alexander interrupted. "He wants you humiliated, broken. But imagine this instead. You walk in beside me, head held high. The man who called you barren sees you standing in the light, not the shadows. The whispers won't be about your failure. They'll be about his mistake." Emily's breath caught. The image bloomed in her mind. Ryan's smug face crumbling as she entered, not as the pitiful ex-wife, but as someone untouchable, someone admired. But doubt quickly smothered the spark. They'll think I'm using you, and I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask," Alexander said firmly. "I'm offering. And I don't care what people think. I care about what's right." "He tried to erase you, Emily. Maybe it's time you showed him, and everyone else, that you're still here." Tears pricked her eyes. For so long she had carried her pain in silence, convinced no one would ever stand with her. And now, here was a man, powerful, respected, offering to walk into the fire at her side. Her voice trembled. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Alexander reached across the table, his hand covering hers with quiet certainty. "Then borrow my strength until you find your own." Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope stronger than fear. And in that fragile moment, she realized the wedding she dreaded might not be her downfall, but her chance for redemption. The morning of Ryan's wedding dawned gray, with clouds hanging low as if the sky itself disapproved. Emily stood in front of the cracked mirror in her tiny apartment, staring at the woman who looked back at her. Her plain clothes hung loose, her hair dull, her eyes shadowed from too many sleepless nights. She hardly recognized herself. For a moment she faltered. "What am I doing?" she thought. Walking into Ryan's world again felt impossible. She was still the woman who scrubbed floors for rent money, the woman he had cast aside. No gown, no limousine, no amount of makeup could erase that truth. But then came the knock on her door. When she opened it, Alexander stood there. Not in his simple wool coat, but in the polished elegance of a man who belonged to the world Ryan worshipped. Behind him, a black limousine gleamed at the curb, its driver standing at attention. 2 garment bags hung from his arm, and his confident smile carried reassurance. "Good morning, Emily," he said warmly. "It's time." Inside, he laid out the contents of the bags. One revealed a gown of midnight silk, its lines simple yet commanding, with a subtle shimmer that seemed to catch the light even in her dim apartment. The other bag held matching heels, a delicate clutch and jewelry, pearls that glowed like moonlight. Emily's breath caught. "I can't wear this. It's too much. It's exactly what you deserve," Alexander interrupted gently. "You are not walking into that room as Ryan's discarded wife. You are walking in as Emily Carter, the woman who will no longer be silenced." Her hands trembled as she reached for the gown. Hours later, with the help of a stylist Alexander had discreetly arranged, Emily stood transformed. Her hair cascaded in soft waves, her eyes shone with a light she hadn't seen in years, and the gown embraced her figure. highlighting the curve of her growing belly with quiet dignity instead of shame. She looked at her reflection again, and this time she didn't see the broken woman Ryan expected. She saw someone reborn. When she stepped outside, the limousine door opened like an invitation to another life. The driver bowed and Alexander offered his hand, steady and sure. "Ready?" he asked. Emily hesitated only for a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. The car purred to life, gliding through the city streets. As they drove, Emily's thoughts churned. She imagined the gasps, the whispers, Ryan's face when he saw her. Fear clawed at her chest, but beside her, Alexander's calm presence was an anchor. "Don't be afraid of their eyes," he said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "They've judged you long enough. Tonight, they will see the truth." The limousine slowed as they neared the Grand Monarch Hotel. Outside, reporters and photographers swarmed, their cameras flashing like lightning. The wedding of Ryan Mitchell and Vanessa Ross had drawn the city's elite, and every detail was being documented. As the car stopped, Emily's heart thundered. She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering silently to the child inside, "This is for us, for our future." The driver stepped forward, opening the door. Alexander rose first, commanding the crowd's attention effortlessly. Then, slowly, Emily placed her heels on the pavement. The flashes intensified, the noise of the crowd swelling. And in that charged moment, Emily Carter, once invisible, became the woman everyone turned to see. Inside the ballroom, Ryan's triumphant smile was about to shatter. The Grand Monarch Hotel pulsed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light, the air thick with perfume, champagne, and gossip. Every guest who mattered was there. Politicians, business tycoons, celebrities, all gathered to celebrate Ryan Mitchell's so-called triumph. He stood at the front of the hall with Vanessa on his arm, his smug smile wide as cameras flashed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies boomed, "please welcome the bride and groom." The crowd erupted in applause. Ryan raised his glass, basking in the adoration. To him, the night was a coronation, proof that he had traded up, proof that his ex-wife was nothing more than a forgotten failure. He hadn't noticed the shift at the entrance yet, because just as Vanessa prepared to toss her hair and bathe in the spotlight, the golden doors of the ballroom creaked open. The music faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned as the crowd collectively drew in a breath. Emily Carter stepped through the doorway. She was radiant. The midnight silk gown clung to her frame with elegance, her hair cascading in soft waves. Pearls glimmered at her throat, catching the chandelier's light. But it wasn't the gown, nor the jewels, nor even the limousine arrival that stunned the crowd. It was her presence. Calm, regal, unshaken. The woman Ryan had painted as pitiful looked nothing like the broken figure they had imagined. And beside her stood Alexander Blackwell. The billionaire's name rippled through the room like a shockwave. "That's Blackwell. The Alexander Blackwell," one man whispered, almost choking on his champagne. "What on earth is he doing here? With her?" Reporters at the back scrambled to adjust their cameras, shutters snapping furiously. Investors who once ignored Emily now leaned forward, curiosity sparking in their eyes. Suddenly, she wasn't just Ryan's ex-wife. She was the woman who had walked in with one of the most powerful men in the city. Ryan's smile froze, his hand tightening painfully around Vanessa's arm. His confident facade faltered, his jaw twitching as disbelief crashed over him. "No," he muttered under his breath, his voice harsh. "It can't be." Vanessa followed his gaze, her painted smile trembling. The grip of her manicured hand on Ryan's sleeve tightened. "Who invited her?" she hissed. But Emily didn't flinch under the stares, nor did she quicken her pace. She glided forward, every step measured, every glance deliberate. With Alexander by her side, she looked untouchable. She looked powerful. The whispers swelled into a storm. Wasn't she supposed to be barren? "She looks incredible. Blackwell chose her over everyone else?" Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained serene. She had promised herself she wouldn't break. Not tonight, not in front of Ryan. Her hand brushed her belly discreetly, drawing strength from the life inside. When she and Alexander reached the front of the ballroom, Ryan's mask shattered completely. His face burned with fury, but beneath the anger lay fear. He had orchestrated every detail of this night to destroy her, and yet here she stood, luminous, unbowed, and impossible to ignore. Alexander placed a steady hand on her back, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the nearest reporters. "Miss Carter and I are here to celebrate life, not lies." The words hung in the air, cryptic yet powerful. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Ryan's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. And in that silence, everyone realized the night would no longer belong to Ryan Mitchell. The ballroom was still vibrating with murmurs after Emily and Alexander's entrance when the master of ceremonies tried to steady the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could." But the words were drowned out as Emily stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room with quiet power. "I have something to say." Gasps spread like wildfire. No one had expected her to speak. The ex-wife was supposed to stand in the shadows, not command the stage. Yet here she was, her back straight, her eyes clear, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Ryan's face drained of color. "Emily," he hissed, trying to mask his panic with forced arrogance. "This isn't your moment. Leave before you embarrass yourself further." But Emily didn't move. Instead, she reached into her clutch and drew out a folded piece of paper, delicate but damning. She unfolded it slowly, letting the anticipation ripple across the crowd. The glossy black and white image shimmered under the chandelier light, an ultrasound. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Emily's voice trembled, but it carried with unwavering strength. "Ryan Mitchell told you I was barren. He mocked me, erased me, and built his new life on that lie. But this—" She raised the ultrasound high enough for the cameras to capture it. "This is proof. I am not barren. I am 6 months pregnant, and this child," her gaze burned into Ryan's pale face, "is his." The collective gasp was deafening. Guests clutched their pearls, men dropped their champagne glasses, and reporters scrambled, their flashes exploding like fireworks. Vanessa's painted smile collapsed. She shook her head violently, her voice a desperate shriek. "No, she's lying! Ryan, tell them she's lying!" But Ryan's lips moved soundlessly. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his body rigid with disbelief. His carefully built facade was cracking under the weight of the truth. Emily's eyes glistened, but she refused to falter. "I carried this secret alone because I wanted peace, but you left me no choice. Tonight you tried to bury me in shame. Instead, you've buried yourself in your own lies." The whispers grew sharper, angrier. So she wasn't barren. He abandoned his pregnant wife? What kind of man does that? Vanessa backed away, her eyes darting toward the exit, as though the walls were closing in. Ryan reached for her, desperate, but she recoiled, her face twisted in horror. "You never told me she was pregnant. You said she was worthless." "You said," her voice cracked, and with a strangled cry, she ripped off her veil and bouquet, hurling them to the floor before storming toward the doors. Reporters surged after her, their cameras ready to document her fall. Ryan's empire of deceit was unraveling in real time. His guests, business partners, investors, allies, were no longer smiling. They were whispering, calculating, distancing themselves from the man whose scandal was now splashed across every lens. Emily lowered the ultrasound, her hands trembling from the enormity of it all. For so long, she had hidden in silence. Tonight, she had spoken, and her voice had changed everything. Alexander's steady presence at her side anchored her as the storm raged. He leaned close, his words just for her. "You've done it, Emily. The truth is finally out." But as the crowd turned against Ryan, a new tension gripped the room. Emily noticed movement at the back, uniformed men stepping inside, carrying folders and stern expressions. The whispers shifted again, darker, sharper. Because the night wasn't finished with Ryan Mitchell. His lies about Emily were only the beginning. The ultrasound revelation had detonated like a bomb. The ballroom was chaos, guests whispering furiously, reporters shouting questions, camera flashes exploding like fireworks. Ryan's face was ashen, his lips trembling with half-formed excuses. And then came Vanessa. She stood frozen, bouquet clutched in trembling hands, her eyes darting from the ultrasound to Ryan, then to the crowd. The golden pedestal she had climbed so eagerly was crumbling beneath her. You lied to me," she stammered, her voice shrill, cutting through the noise. She turned on Ryan, her face flushed with rage and panic. "You told me she was barren. You told me she was worthless. You promised me." Her words choked off into sobs. Guests stared openly, their judgment sharp and merciless. Vanessa's carefully curated image of perfection, the radiant young bride, the enviable replacement, was dissolving under the harsh glare of truth. No, she whispered to herself, shaking her head violently. I won't be dragged down with you. With trembling fingers, she ripped the veil from her head, the delicate lace tearing as it hit the marble floor. Gasps followed, but she wasn't finished. Her bouquet slipped from her grip and scattered across the ground, white roses trampled under the feet of restless guests. Look at her, one society woman whispered, clutching her pearls, running like a child. She's finished, another muttered. No brand, no sponsor, no runway will touch her after this. Vanessa's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Her glamorous career as a model had been built on one thing, her association with Ryan Mitchell. And now that foundation was radioactive. Vanessa! Ryan's desperate voice cracked across the ballroom as he reached for her. But she recoiled, eyes blazing with humiliation. Don't touch me, don't you dare touch me. You've ruined me. Her heels clattered against the marble as she spun toward the exit, shoving past reporters who swarmed, shouting questions. Cameras caught every tear-streaked line of her face, every frantic movement. Vanessa, were you aware Mr. Mitchell abandoned his pregnant wife? Did you know about the child? Are you complicit in covering up the affair? No, I didn't know anything, she screamed, her mascara running, her once perfect face streaked with black. I'm not the villain here, I'm not. But no one believed her. To the cameras, she was the mistress who stole a husband from a sick wife, only to be exposed as complicit in his lies. The narrative was already cemented. Her protests sounded like excuses, her cries like guilt. By the time she reached the grand doors, she was no longer a bride. She was a spectacle, her career unraveling with every camera flash. She shoved the doors open and vanished into the night, leaving behind only the shredded veil and crushed roses, a symbol of her collapse. Inside, the whispers turned savage, pathetic. She thought she could win. She'll never work again. Emily stood silently, her hand resting on her belly, watching the scene unfold. She hadn't needed to raise her voice against Vanessa. The truth alone had destroyed her. Ryan, however, wasn't finished, his jaw clenched, fury replacing fear. He stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at Emily. This isn't over. You think a piece of paper proves anything? You think you can waltz in here and ruin me? But before he could continue, movement at the back of the ballroom caught everyone's attention. Uniformed men were advancing, their expressions grim, their folders thick with evidence. And as Vanessa fled into obscurity, Ryan Mitchell was about to face something far worse than humiliation. Justice. The ballroom, once filled with admiration for Ryan, now hummed with disdain. The image of Emily holding the ultrasound had shattered his carefully polished facade. Vanessa's meltdown and escape had only fueled the fire. Yet Ryan still tried to cling to his throne of lies. His chest heaved as he stepped forward, his voice rising above the whispers. Don't listen to her. She's lying. This is nothing but a desperate attempt to ruin my wedding. A brittle laugh followed his words, sharp and hollow. It took him a moment to realize it hadn't come from him. It came from the crowd. A ripple of chuckles spread among the guests, mocking, merciless. She's lying? A woman's voice cut through, dripping with sarcasm. And yet the ultrasound has your name on the file. Reporters surged closer, waving their cameras. Mr. Mitchell, are you denying this child is yours? Did you abandon your wife while she was pregnant? Ryan's skin flushed red, half sweat beading along his hairline. He tugged at his collar, his arrogance cracking. This is slander. She's jealous. She couldn't stand losing me, so now she's inventing a child to destroy me. The laughter grew louder. A few guests shook their heads, muttering, pathetic. Others smirked openly, savoring his unraveling. The powerful allies who once crowded around him now drifted away, not wanting to be caught in the fallout. Emily stood tall, saying nothing. Her silence was louder than any argument. Her very presence, steady and dignified, was the perfect contrast to Ryan's spiraling rage. You all believe her? Ryan's voice cracked as he jabbed a finger toward Emily. She's nothing. She's always been nothing. I gave her everything, and this is how she repays me? A man near the front, a business partner Ryan had once dismissed with arrogance, chuckled darkly. Everything? From where I stand, she looks like the only one with dignity left. More laughter followed. Ryan's head whipped around the room, his eyes wide with desperation. Stop laughing, he roared. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've built? But his words only fed the fire. Guests exchanged amused glances, their respect for him evaporating. What once was fear and admiration had transformed into ridicule. Ryan Mitchell, the man who boasted of trading up, was now the evening's punchline. Alexander stood calmly at Emily's side, his expression unreadable. He didn't need to speak. The contrast between him and Ryan was enough. Where Ryan shouted and flailed, Alexander radiated composure and strength. The crowd noticed. They always noticed. Ryan's eyes locked on Alexander, his voice dripping with venom. "And you, what are you doing here? Parading her around like a trophy? You think this makes you a hero?" Alexander's gaze was steady, cold. "I don't need to be a hero, Ryan. But tonight, everyone sees you for what you are." The words landed like a hammer. The laughter returned, sharper now, crueler. Ryan's face twisted with fury, veins bulging at his temples. He reached for a glass of champagne, downing it in one gulp, as if the alcohol could steady his shaking hands. "Enough," he shouted, slamming the glass down so hard it shattered. Shards scattered across the marble floor, the sound echoing like the final crack in his empire. "This is still my night, mine." But as he screamed, the ballroom doors opened again. The uniformed men who had been waiting now stepped forward with solemn precision. Their presence silenced the laughter instantly, and Ryan Mitchell realized his humiliation was about to turn into something far worse: exposure. The laughter that had mocked Ryan only moments earlier died instantly when the ballroom doors swung wide again. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor as a group of uniformed men and sharply dressed officials entered, their badges glinting under the chandelier light. The master of ceremonies faltered, his voice trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, remain calm." The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers rising like a storm. What was happening? Why were law enforcement and auditors here, at Ryan Mitchell's wedding? Ryan's bravado cracked further. His eyes darted wildly from the men approaching the stage to the guests, searching for an ally, a way out. His voice was a broken echo of its former arrogance. What is this? This is a private event." One of the men stepped forward, a stern-faced auditor with steel-gray hair and a thick folder in his hand. His voice carried with the authority of final judgment. "Ryan Mitchell, we are here on behalf of the Financial Crimes Division. You are under investigation for large-scale embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of company funds." The words crashed over the crowd like thunder. Gasps, sharp and disbelieving, filled the air. Champagne flutes slipped from fingers and shattered. The auditor flipped open the folder, revealing damning documents. "We have evidence that you siphoned millions from company accounts to fund your personal lifestyle. Lavish trips, luxury cars, and this very wedding." Reporters erupted in a frenzy, shouting over one another. "Is this true? Did you steal company funds for your wedding?" Cameras flashed, immortalizing every second of Ryan's downfall. Ryan's face turned scarlet. He tried to muster his old arrogance, but his voice wavered. "Lies. This is a setup. I built that company with my bare hands." But the lead officer cut him off coldly. "And you nearly destroyed it with your greed. We have bank transfers, falsified invoices, and insider testimony. Your board of directors has already been notified. As of this moment, you are suspended from all company operations." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests scrambled away from Ryan, as though his disgrace was contagious. Business partners whispered furiously, distancing themselves from the scandal. Investors looked enraged, some already pulling out their phones to call lawyers. Emily stood frozen, her hand resting on her stomach, watching it all unfold. She hadn't expected this. She had come to reveal the truth about Ryan's lies against her, but now the universe itself seemed to be delivering justice in full. Alexander's gaze was calm, unwavering. He leaned toward her, his voice low but firm. "You see, Emily? When men build empires on cruelty and deceit, it only takes one truth for everything to collapse." Ryan staggered backward, sweat pouring down his face. He grabbed at the microphone, his words desperate. "This is all a misunderstanding. You don't understand. Vanessa was supposed to." His voice cracked as he realized Vanessa was gone, fled into the night. He was utterly alone. The lead officer signaled to his men. "Mr. Mitchell, you are hereby placed under arrest. Please come with us peacefully." The metallic snap of handcuffs rang out, silencing the last of Ryan's protests. He struggled, his voice shrill, no longer commanding but pathetic. "No, you can't do this to me. This is my night." But his night was over. The guests watched in stunned silence as the once proud groom was dragged toward the exit, his wrists bound, his empire in ruins. The cameras captured every angle. Ryan Mitchell, humiliated, disgraced, and shackled in front of the world he had once sought to impress. And as the doors closed behind him, all eyes turned back to Emily, because she was no longer the victim, but the woman who had survived the storm. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the ballroom like a death knell. Ryan Mitchell, once the golden boy of high society, stood in the center of the stage with his wrists bound in cold steel. His tuxedo, once a symbol of triumph, now looked pitiful, creased and damp with sweat. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the relentless clicking of cameras. Every flash immortalized his disgrace. The same reporters who had written glowing profiles about his rise were now feasting on his collapse. Ryan thrashed against the officer's grip, his voice desperate. "You can't do this to me. I am Ryan Mitchell. I built an empire. You should be applauding me, not." But his words drowned beneath a wave of derisive laughter. Guests who once clung to his influence now openly mocked him. Business rivals smirked, delighted to see his downfall. Former allies whispered to one another, their faces lit with vindictive satisfaction. "An empire of lies," one man sneered. "A thief in a tuxedo," another woman muttered. Ryan's eyes darted wildly, searching for Vanessa, for anyone who might stand by him. But she was gone. His so-called soulmate had abandoned him at the first crack in his facade. His allies had melted into the crowd, unwilling to tarnish their reputations by standing near him. He was alone, utterly and completely. "Emily," he shouted suddenly, his voice ragged with desperation. His gaze locked on her, standing serene beside Alexander. Tell them you're lying. Save me." The plea was pathetic, almost childlike. For years Ryan had treated Emily as worthless, discarding her without remorse. Now, in his ruin, he begged her for salvation. Emily's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of release. She had dreamed of this moment in her darkest nights when his cruelty had crushed her spirit. And now it was real. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "I don't need to say anything, Ryan. The truth has already spoken." The crowd erupted in applause. Not for Ryan, but for her. For the woman who had endured, survived, and now stood vindicated. Ryan's face twisted, red with rage and humiliation. He lunged against the officers, screaming, "This isn't over. You'll regret this, Emily. All of you will regret this." His words cracked into hysterical shrieks as the officers dragged him back, his polished shoes scraping helplessly against the marble. The image was unforgettable. Ryan Mitchell, once hailed as untouchable, now reduced to a spectacle of failure. His empire had collapsed in the very place he had sought to display his glory. Investors whispered about pulling out, business partners discussed lawsuits, sponsors muttered about contracts voided. Everything Ryan had built with arrogance and deceit crumbled in minutes, leaving nothing but ashes. Emily pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling her child move within her. She wasn't just watching Ryan's ruin, she was watching the end of the chains he had wrapped around her. For the first time in years, she felt free. Alexander leaned close, his voice low and firm. "His story is over, Emily. Now it's time to write yours." Her heart swelled, but before she could respond, the master of ceremonies' voice quavered, trying to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm." But the guests weren't looking at him anymore. Their attention had shifted, not to Ryan's disgrace, but to Emily's quiet triumph. And in that moment, Emily realized the night wasn't just about Ryan's destruction, it was about her rebirth. The doors slammed shut behind Ryan, the metallic clang of the handcuffs still echoing faintly in the hall. For a moment, the ballroom was utterly still. The chaos, the whispers, the laughter, all of it faded into an eerie silence. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the only person left standing in the light. Emily Carter. She hadn't moved since Ryan was dragged away. Her hand remained resting on her stomach, her back straight, her chin lifted. Though her heart raced wildly inside her chest, outwardly she radiated a calm strength that stunned the room. The silence was heavy, not uncomfortable, but reverent, like the hush of a cathedral before prayer. Emily glanced around slowly, meeting the stares without flinching. These were the same people who had whispered about her behind closed doors, who had pitied her, judged her, written her off as barren and broken. And now, every one of them saw her differently. It was not pity that filled their eyes now. It was awe. A society woman, once a close friend of Vanessa's, raised a trembling hand to her lips. She was telling the truth all along. A man in a tailored suit muttered, shaking his head. And he left her? For that? He threw away dignity for scandal. The murmurs grew, but none were cruel anymore. They were confessions, admissions of how wrong they had been. Emily's chest tightened with emotion. For months, she had carried shame like a scarlet letter. She had lived invisible, silenced by Ryan's lies. But tonight, the silence of the room was different. It wasn't the silence of dismissal, it was the silence of respect. Beside her, Alexander's presence was steady, his gaze sweeping over the crowd with quiet authority. But he didn't speak. He didn't need to. This moment belonged to her. A reporter, emboldened, stepped forward, microphone trembling in her hand. "Miss Carter, how did you endure it? How did you survive what he did to you?" Emily hesitated, her lips parting, then closing again. She wanted to answer, to pour out the nights of hunger, the days of labor, the tears cried alone in her small apartment, but no words could capture it all. So she simply pressed her palm more firmly against her belly and whispered, "For this life inside me." The words rippled through the room like a wave. Gasps followed, then nods, then tears from strangers who had never cared for her before. A woman dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Even hardened businessmen looked down, ashamed. Emily's throat tightened. For so long, she had believed her story ended when Ryan left her. But now, standing in the spotlight, she realized this was not an ending at all. It was a beginning. And yet, even as the crowd shifted from judgment to admiration, Emily felt the weight of the moment pressing down. Could she truly carry this? Could she transform not just her own life, but her child's, in a world that had once turned its back on her? Alexander leaned slightly closer, his voice soft but grounding. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Her eyes flicked to him, startled by the gentleness in his tone. For a brief second, her walls trembled. The silence of the ballroom grew heavier, charged, waiting for her next move. Because everyone knew this wasn't just about Ryan's downfall. It was about what Emily would choose to do with her newfound power. The ballroom still hummed with the weight of silence, every eye fixed on Emily. But then the air shifted. Alexander Blackwell, the billionaire whose presence had stunned the guests from the moment he walked in, stepped forward. His tall frame radiated composure, but there was something else now, a quiet vulnerability rarely seen in men of his stature. He turned toward Emily, his gaze soft yet unwavering. "Emily," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "I've watched you face cruelty that would have broken most people. Yet here you stand, not broken, but stronger than anyone could have imagined." Emily's lips parted in shock. She hadn't expected him to speak, not like this, not here. Her pulse quickened, her mind racing. Alexander's eyes glistened with sincerity as he reached into his pocket. Gasps swept the crowd as he drew out a small velvet box, its deep blue catching the golden chandelier light. With deliberate grace, he lowered himself to one knee on the polished marble floor. The room erupted with whispers. "He's proposing, here? Now? To her? After everything?" Emily froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. The world blurred until only Alexander's steady gaze anchored her. He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring so brilliant it scattered light in every direction. But his words, not the jewel, held the power of the moment. "I don't care about what the world has said about you," he continued. "I don't care about the lies Ryan spread or the whispers of the crowd. What I see is a woman who has endured heartbreak, who has carried life inside her with courage, who has faced humiliation, and still walked with dignity." Tears stung Emily's eyes, spilling before she could stop them. Alexander's voice softened, though it carried the weight of a vow. "Emily Carter, I want to walk beside you, not to save you, but to stand with you. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, and to love not only you, but the child you carry, as if he or she were my own. Will you let me be the man who gives you the life you deserve?" The crowd held its breath, the silence electric. For the first time in her life, Emily felt the world watching her not with scorn, but with hope. Her knees wobbled, her throat tightened. She thought of the nights she had cried alone, whispering promises to her unborn child that they would never be unloved. She thought of Ryan's cruelty, his abandonment, his lies. And then she thought of Alexander. His kindness in the alley, his strength at her side, his belief in her when she had nearly forgotten how to believe in herself. Her lips trembled, words caught in her throat. Alexander remained on one knee, his hand steady, his eyes never wavering. For a man who had everything, he looked at her as though she were the one gift he had been waiting for his entire life. Emily's tears fell freely now, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Alexander, I—" The room leaned in, desperate for her answer, as the moment of decision hung like a jewel in the air. The silence in the ballroom was unbearable. Stretched so tight it felt like the air itself might snap. Alexander remained on one knee, diamond ring glinting, his gaze never leaving Emily. All around them the city's elite leaned forward, breathless, waiting. Emily's hands shook as she pressed them to her chest. Her heart raced wildly, not from fear but from the enormity of the moment. For years she had lived in Ryan's shadow, dismissed, discarded, humiliated. Now, in the very place Ryan had sought to destroy her, the world's eyes were upon her again. But this time, they weren't waiting to laugh. They were waiting to cheer. Her lips quivered as she looked down at Alexander. His expression was steady, his eyes full of something Ryan had never given her: unconditional respect. His words still rang in her ears. "I don't want to save you, I want to stand with you." Emily's throat tightened with tears. She thought of the nights she had whispered to her unborn child, promising love even in poverty, vowing they would never be alone. Now standing before her was a man offering to fulfill that promise beside her. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Yes." The word was soft at first, fragile like a newborn's breath. But then her strength returned. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and repeated louder, firmer, "Yes, yes, Alexander, I will." The ballroom exploded. Applause thundered through the air, rattling the chandeliers. Guests rose from their seats in a standing ovation, clapping, cheering, some even wiping away tears. For the first time in months, Emily wasn't the subject of pity or ridicule. She was the center of admiration, the embodiment of resilience. Reporters shouted over one another, their cameras flashing like fireworks. Emily Carter accepts Alexander Blackwell's proposal? From discarded wife to future power couple. The headlines were already writing themselves. Emily's hands trembled as Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. He rose from his knee and without hesitation drew her into his arms. She collapsed against him, tears streaming freely, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. The applause grew louder, swelling like a tide. It was no longer just about Emily and Alexander. It was about justice, about seeing cruelty defeated and dignity restored. Every clap was a strike against Ryan's lies, every cheer a celebration of Emily's triumph. Emily pulled back slightly, looking into Alexander's eyes. Her lips trembled into a smile she hadn't thought she'd ever wear again. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't need to thank me," he replied softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You only needed someone to remind you of who you've always been." The crowd's energy surged, guests calling out congratulations, strangers reaching to shake Emily's hand, women murmuring words of solidarity. The same people who once whispered behind her back were now lifting her up. But even amid the cheers, Emily felt something deeper. It wasn't just about Alexander's proposal. It was about the promise she had made to herself and to her child, that she would never bow her head again. Tonight, she hadn't just accepted a ring. She had accepted a new life, one where she and her child would be loved, honored, and protected. The ovation finally began to fade, replaced by a reverent hush. All eyes remained on Emily, waiting to see what she would do next. Because everyone knew the story wasn't just ending in applause, it was building toward a final, unforgettable triumph. The thunderous applause still echoed through the ballroom when the heavy double doors swung open once more. Ryan Mitchell reappeared, but not as the groom he imagined himself to be. Flanked by officers, his wrists bound in steel, he stumbled under their grip as cameras surged to capture every humiliating step. The crowd's cheers for Emily turned into mocking laughter for him. The once admired businessman was now reduced to a criminal, dragged across the very stage he had designed to showcase his triumph. His tuxedo was rumpled, his face pale, his eyes wild with desperation. "You'll regret this," he screamed hoarsely, his voice cracking as he strained against the cuffs. "Emily, You think you've won? You're nothing without me. Nothing. But his words rang hollow. No one believed him anymore. No one feared him. The guests who once bowed to his power now sneered openly. To them, he was no longer a man of influence. He was a cautionary tale. Emily didn't flinch. She stood tall beside Alexander, her hand resting over her stomach, her new ring glinting under the chandelier. She looked Ryan in the eye, her voice steady, strong, final. I was never nothing, and tonight, the world knows it. The officers tugged him forward, his shoes scraping against the marble floor. His curses faded as he was dragged out of the ballroom for the last time, his empire collapsing behind him. Silence followed for a beat, heavy and cleansing. Then the crowd erupted again, not with gossip, but with cheers for Emily. Strangers she had once feared now clapped for her, some even chanting her name. Alexander turned to her, offering his arm with quiet reverence. Shall we? Emily hesitated only a moment before slipping her hand into his. Together, they walked through the aisle of guests, not as prey to gossip, but as victors. Every step felt like a reclamation of her dignity, every gaze from the crowd a confirmation of her worth. As they reached the grand doors, the cameras swarmed. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes illuminated her radiant figure. But for once, Emily wasn't afraid of the spotlight. She welcomed it. One reporter called out, Emily, what message do you have for women who've been where you were? Emily paused, her hand tightening gently on Alexander's arm. She lifted her chin, her voice firm yet tender. That no woman is ever truly powerless. We may be abandoned, mocked, even erased, but the truth always finds its way. And when it does, we rise. The crowd roared in approval, their applause echoing down the marble corridors as Emily and Alexander stepped out into the night. The limousine waited, sleek and shining, a symbol not of vanity but of transformation. As the driver opened the door, Alexander looked down at her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. This is just the beginning. Emily smiled through her tears, her free hand brushing her rounded belly. For me, for this child, for us. She slid into the limousine, Alexander following, their fingers entwined. Outside, the lights of the city glittered like 1,000 promises. Inside, Emily leaned against him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Behind them, Ryan's cries of rage faded into nothingness, swallowed by the night. Ahead of them stretched a future she had once thought impossible. A future built not on lies and cruelty, but on truth, dignity, and love. And as the limousine pulled away, Emily Carter left behind the ashes of her past, stepping fully into the radiant life she was always meant to claim. So that's how the story ends, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me until this moment, aren't you? If you've stayed this far, then something in Emily's journey must have touched your heart in its own way. And maybe that's because her story isn't just hers. It's also ours. Life will test us. People may betray us, mock us, or try to define us by our weakest moments. But remember what the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Emily couldn't control Ryan's cruelty, but she could choose her strength, her dignity, and her future. And so can you. If you're going through darkness right now, let this story remind you that you are not powerless. The truth, like the sunrise, cannot be hidden forever. And every storm you endure shapes the strength you'll need for tomorrow. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs hope tonight, and don't forget to subscribe. Because here, on this channel, we rise together.
Thank you.